The sun was setting low over the barren plains, spilling molten gold across the sand and thorns. The wind whistled through broken fences and dry mesquite, carrying the faint cry of a hawk and the sigh of a lonely land that had seen too much blood, too much dust, and too many good men buried shallow. That was when the cowboy saw her, a tiny girl in a torn calico dress, standing barefoot beside a broken wagon wheel. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks streaked with dust and tears. She couldn't have been older than 8, but what struck him most wasn't her frailty, it was her eyes. Wide, deep, and defiant, staring right up at him as though she'd been waiting. He pulled his massive horse to a halt, the animal's shadow covering her like a shelter. "Where's your folks, little one?" he asked, his deep voice rumbling low. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "They're gone," she said quietly. Then, after a pause, "You need a wife, and I need a dad." The cowboy froze. For a moment, he thought the heat had gone to his head. "What did you just say?" he asked. She lifted her chin. "I said you need a wife. And I need a dad." The words cut through the silence like a bullet through glass. The cowboy, Caleb Brandt, a man known from Texas to Montana as the Giant of the Red Plains, felt something stir inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years. He had been alone too long since the war, too long since the fire that took his ranch and the woman he'd once promised to marry. He'd sworn off everything soft and sweet. No family, no love, no home. Yet here stood this little girl, bold as a preacher, staring him down like she could see the truth hiding in his chest. "Where's your ma?" he asked again, voice quieter now. She looked toward the wagon lying broken behind her. Smoke still drifted from its shattered boards. She ain't waking up," the girl whispered. "Neither's my uncle. It was bandits." Caleb dismounted slowly. He walked toward the wagon, boots crunching over glass and ashes. When he reached the back, he stopped cold. 2 bodies lay covered by a blanket. He bowed his head. The wind picked up, whirling dust between them. When he turned back, the girl hadn't moved. She just stood there, staring at him, clutching a small ragged doll to her chest. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lila," she said. "Lila Mae Turner." He nodded. "Well, Miss Lila Mae Turner, you can't stay out here alone." "I ain't alone," she said stubbornly. "You're here." Caleb blinked. "That's not how this works." But Lila crossed her arms, a mirror of stubbornness that looked oddly familiar, like something he'd lost long ago. "You got no ring on your hand, mister. You ride alone. You don't got no woman waiting on you. That means you need a wife." He almost smiled, but his heart was too heavy. "And where do I find this wife you're talking about?" Lila pointed to herself. "My ma told me before she went, she said to find someone strong. Someone who ain't afraid of bad men. Someone who could be my pa." Caleb took a long, slow breath. The plains had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He didn't know what made him do it. Maybe it was the way her voice cracked when she said "my ma." Maybe it was the way her tiny hands shook. Or maybe it was the way she looked at him, not with fear, but with trust. He crouched down, his shadow falling over her small figure. "All right, Lila," he said softly. "You can come with me. But we'll find you a home, not me a wife. You understand?" She nodded, but her eyes told him she didn't believe him one bit. They rode for hours under the bleeding sky. The desert turned purple, then black. Coyotes howled in the distance. Lila leaned against Caleb's chest, clutching his coat. He'd told himself he'd take her to the next town, drop her off at the church, and ride on. But something about the way she whispered in her sleep, "Don't leave me, Daddy," sent a knife through his ribs. By the time they reached Dry Creek, the moon was high and silver. Caleb stopped outside the saloon and climbed down, lifting Lila into his arms. Inside, the piano went quiet the moment he entered. "Lord Almighty," someone whispered. "It's Brandt." Men turned away from their whiskey. Women froze mid-laugh. Caleb Brandt was known for one thing: never smiling, never staying, and never forgiving. He ignored them all and carried Lila to the counter. "You got a room for the night?" he asked the innkeeper. The man nodded nervously. "Of course, Mr. Brandt." As he handed over the key, the saloon doors creaked again. A woman stepped through, tall, dark-haired, and fierce-eyed. She wore a widow's black dress and carried a revolver at her hip. Her name was Clara Wren, the schoolteacher who everyone said had once shot a man for raising his hand to her. When her eyes fell on the little girl in Caleb's arms, something softened in her face. "What's this?" she asked. Caleb looked up, found her out near Iron Creek. Her ma and uncle didn't make it. Clara's lips tightened. Poor thing, she'll need someone to look after her. Lila stirred then, looking up sleepily at Clara. "Are you my new mama?" she asked in a whisper that sent the whole saloon into silence. Caleb felt the air leave his lungs. Clara blinked, taken aback, and then smiled faintly. "I don't think so, sweetheart." But Lila shook her head. "You're pretty, and you don't look scared of him." Caleb cleared his throat. "Lila." The little girl looked at him, eyes blending with something too clever for her age. "You need a wife," she reminded him. "And I need a dad." The saloon erupted in soft laughter. Caleb's jaw tightened, but Clara only tilted her head and said, "She's got a point, mister." Brent. That night, as the town settled into silence, Caleb sat by the window of the small room, watching Lila sleep. He'd told himself again and again that come morning, he'd take her to the sheriff, let him handle it. But when dawn came and she woke with a smile, "Morning, Daddy," he couldn't do it. He bought her new clothes, fixed her a breakfast, and took her to Clara's schoolhouse, pretending it was just temporary. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into whispers. They said the Giant Cowboy was softening, that he was seen fixing fences near the schoolhouse, that he'd been seen talking with Clara Wren. One night, while riding back from town, Caleb saw smoke rising over the ridge. The schoolhouse was on fire. He spurred his horse like the devil was at his heels. When he arrived, he saw Clara struggling to pull the last of the children out through a window. "Where's Lila?" he shouted. Clara's face went pale. Inside, Caleb didn't think. He crashed through the flames, heat searing his skin, smoke clawing at his lungs. He found her curled under a desk, clutching her doll. "Daddy," she cried as he scooped her up. The roof gave a groan like thunder, then collapsed. He covered her with his body as the world turned to fire. When he woke, his back was burned, his shirt torn, but Lila was safe. Clara knelt beside them, tears streaking her soot-blackened face. "You fool," she whispered. "You could have died." Caleb looked at Lila, who was clinging to Clara now. "Couldn't let her lose another family," he said simply. Clara stared at him for a long time, then reached out and touched his cheek. "Maybe she didn't just find a father," she said softly. "Maybe we both found something we lost." He didn't answer. He just looked at them, the woman and the little girl, and for the first time in years, the ache in his chest eased. The next Sunday, they stood together at the small church on the hill. The preacher didn't call it a wedding, not officially. But when Lila slipped her tiny hand into Caleb's and whispered, "Now we're real," even the hard men of Dry Creek looked away. Later, as the sun dipped low again over the plains, Lila sat on Caleb's lap by the porch, her doll between them. "You turned around that day," she said sleepily, "when I said you needed a wife." He smiled faintly. "Yes, I did." She looked up at him. "Why?" Caleb gazed out at the horizon, the last light of day painting the sky red and gold. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "the smallest voice says the truest thing." Lila yawned, leaning against him. "And now you got a wife and I got a dad." He chuckled softly, resting his rough hand over hers. "Reckon we both got more than we bargained for, sweetheart." The wind carried her sleepy laugh out across the prairie, where the ghosts of his past finally faded into the dusk. And for the first time in a long, long while, the Giant Cowboy wasn't alone anymore.